How are you doing? This is Faith at Faith and Books. I thought I would do sort of a mid-month check-in, though it's the 19th of February today. I think that's the date. So, a little past the midpoint. But today is President's Day in the United States, so we have the Monday off. So I'm doing this in the middle of the morning in a house where there are a lot of people. So let's see if I can do this. I usually like to be alone. I usually do things early in the morning or in my car, but let's see if this works. Okay, so I think a couple of weeks ago was my last video, and I didn't want to say anything when I was making the video because I hadn't told all my children. But at the time, my husband had just gotten to the hospital. He spent 4 nights in the hospital. He's better now. It's still kind of ongoing, but he's not in the hospital, so that's a good thing. So that was just crazy. Last week was kind of crazy. I noticed that I do that a lot whenever I'm making a video. I talk about how crazy it is. I think it's just always crazy here, and I'm always feeling overwhelmed. Anyway, so in that video I was saying that I was hoping to finish Daniel Deronda by George Eliot in a couple of days. And I did. I finished it on the 6th, February 6th. So my January reading bled into February. But I finished Daniel Deronda, and I don't know why I still have a bookmark in there. And I thought that the conclusion was really good. I think Eliot wrapped things up really well. This is not my favorite George Eliot, though, because I really had trouble with Gwendolyn. And I mean, her character arc gets better as it goes along, but it takes a long time. And she has a very dramatic arc in the plot. But I also just had trouble with the character of Grandcourt because I don't feel like Eliot fleshed him out very well, or she could have done better. I didn't get him. I didn't get the whole marriage. And I know this was Victorian times and they didn't talk about sex. And I don't like graphic sex or anything like that in the book. But when you're talking about newlyweds, you do have to at least imply it or something. And she was so repulsed by her husband. That needed to be part of it. I just felt like there was a gaping hole there where there should have been something about their romantic relationships, even if just implied, but I didn't see anything. So it just felt kind of wooden. Grandcourt felt kind of wooden. The marriage felt kind of wooden. And so I don't know. It's not my favorite. However, it was a really interesting study of family, kind of like how your family and how your circumstances drive your fate, and how the people who have wealth and everything maybe aren't necessarily freer than people who don't. And of course, a lot of this has to do with anti-Semitism. And like I said before, I feel like Eliot's heart was in the right place, but she couldn't get out of that Victorian mindset that they were so other from Europeans or whatever. But I did like the conclusion. And of course, George Eliot is a fantastic writer, and she's my favorite Victorian woman author. And even if this doesn't rank as high as Middlemarch or Adam Bede, to me, it's still a really good read. So I enjoyed it. I'm very glad that I finally got around to reading Daniel Deronda. I'd been meaning to read it for years and years, and I finally did it. So a great sense of accomplishment there. Then when my husband was in the hospital, I couldn't really concentrate. So luckily, I'm going from the sublime to the ridiculous, but the next book up was The Secret of Shadow Ranch. And there's my ring light, making that circle there. Anyway, this was a fun read. It was just right for me because I was with my husband in the hospital, and he wanted the room really dark. So it had this nice big print, and I could stand by the window and read, or I could go stand by the door in the hallway and read. And it was light but absorbing. I enjoyed it a lot. It's set in the Southwest. She flies to Phoenix, and then they drive for hours into the desert to this to Shadow Ranch. And there's all these nefarious things going on. There's a gang, and it had all the Southwestern things. You know, there's a ghost town, and they go to a rodeo, all sorts of things. And of course, they're doing all this horseback riding. And it was a really fun read. It was just the right thing for the situation that I was in. So I enjoyed it very much. And as long as I'm enjoying these Nancy Drews, I'm going to stay in the group. And I don't talk about them as much as they do in the group. I just sort of move on, because to me they're like potato chips, you know. So not much to talk about. But I'm enjoying it, and so I'm going to keep on with it as long as it seems like I can. So, and then after that, I also read this. I read that in a day in the hospital, and then I read this little house book. So there was a little house readathon, and it happens every year from February 7th to February 10th. And it's because Laura Ingalls Wilder was born February 7th, and then 90 some years later, she died February 10th. And the book that the group read for that, and that's all I did. I didn't participate in the live stream or discussion with anybody. I just read the book. It was Old Town in the Groves by Cynthia Rylant. And as I was reading it, I realized I had read it before, or there were just certain parts of it that were so familiar to me. I don't know why I'm leaving all these bookmarks in these books. But anyway, it was a fun read. It's about the 2 years that Laura doesn't talk about in her series, in the Little House series, when she was in Iowa, Burr Oak, Iowa. And I remembered parts of it. I remembered the parts where they were working in the hotel, and I remembered when her only brother died. He was a little baby when he passed away. And so I remembered both those parts. So when I was reading it, I was like, this is really familiar. I must have read it before, like a long time ago with my kids. But I'd completely forgotten that I had read it. I'd completely forgotten it existed. So anyway, so that was the next thing. And that was a nice, Cynthia Rylant does a good job. She's mostly channeling Laura Ingalls Wilder's writing. There were a few instances where it definitely wasn't Laura Ingalls Wilder, but that's fine. It's Cynthia Rylant. So yeah, I enjoyed it. It was fun. All right. And then this is, I mean, I'm like schizophrenic here. I'm just ping-ponging back and forth between Daniel Deronda and Nancy Drew, and then Little House. And then I went on to Dostoevsky. So I read Notes from the Underground, and this, I don't think this is a good introduction to Dostoevsky, and I think they do that too in college. They have you read this because it's short. And you know, it's amazing because he's writing, it's told in the first person, and the person is crazy. They're insane, and they're awful. They're vicious. They're self-absorbed. They're histrionic. They're paranoid. And they say a lot, the guy says a lot of things, though. I mean, he's still human. He's still fully human, and he gets upset at injustice, and, you know, he wants things to go well, and I mean, he wants friends, but he has no idea how to make friends, and he hates people anyway. So it's crazy. It's a roller coaster ride. Even though it's short, it really packs some punch. The best part, I thought, was his conversation he had with a prostitute after he'd slept with her. That was when he came out as most human, as most humane. But then it gets all twisted again. He's really crazy. And apparently it was written in reaction to a book that came out in Russia about how, you know, since man was now enlightened and we have science and we're all reasonable, that now we can form a utopian society. And so he's saying, no, you can be fully human and be absolutely crazy, you know, not be able to get along. It doesn't necessarily translate. So I think that's what he was saying in this. There's a lot of, I mean, he's an excellent writer, and there's a lot of thought-provoking things in here and little kernels of truth. But it's mixed in with this absolute insanity. So it was a short but very intense book. And I tried to read part of it in the hospital, and then I finished it up at home. When did I finish this? I've been taking notes. When did I finish this? I can't even find it. Oh, I finished this the day before Valentine's Day. And then, so I tried to read The Villa, which is the group read for the We Love Jenny, and I DNF'd it, even though I bought it. I bought it and it's on my Kindle, but I think I started it like right after I had finished Daniel Deronda, and the writing style was awful, I thought. And I didn't like the character. I didn't like the way she was setting up the friendship. I didn't like the language in it. To me, it felt like something written by a 13-year-old. Like it was so flat and pedestrian, and I just didn't like it at all. So maybe I should have given it a chance. Maybe that was the character, and if I had just gotten past that, I could have. But you can write. I don't know, the woman wasn't adolescent. So I was going to say, like Catcher in the Rye, he's adolescent, but somehow you can read him. But this woman wasn't. Maybe that was the problem. She'd been out of college and been married for 7 years, and then her husband left her, and she's writing like a 13-year-old. I was not impressed. Now, I know that was one of Jenny's favorite books last year, but two things in my defense for DNFing it on such, I only got like 3% in or something. One is I'm old, and there are just certain books. I don't like a lot of current books. I think it was for a much younger audience. And what was my other point? Oh, the truth is, I know that Jenny really loved Shelley and Byron, but they are my two least favorite poets. So I knew I didn't share that love that she had for them. And that was what the book was going to be about. And I'm just not about sex, drugs, and rock and roll. And that's what it was going to be about. It was going to be how cool Shelley and all those people were because they were living this alternative life. And I don't buy it. That's not what I just don't want to read about it. So I DNF'd The Villa. But what I did read, I read the whole poem on Ash Wednesday. And then I'm reading, it's broken up into different parts, so I'm reading parts of it every morning. But I read Ash Wednesday by T.S. Eliot. And it is beautiful. I don't quite know what it means, but I love the language. I love his cadence. I love his little verbal play. It reminded me a little bit of the love song of J. Alfred Prufrock, which you might be familiar with. I'll just read the first stanza. Because I do not hope to turn again, because I do not hope to turn, desiring this man's gift and that man's scope, I no longer strive towards such things. Why should the aged eagle stretch its wings? Why should I mourn the vanished power of the usual rain? So it reminds me a little bit of J. Alfred Prufrock. And what was moving to me about it is that it incorporates prayer. Now, I think T.S. Eliot was Anglican, but for instance, he ends this part with, pray for us sinners now and at the hour of our death. Pray for us now and at the hour of our death. And that's a line from the Hail Mary. So, and then in another part of it, he actually has the, what is it called? The prayers that we say on Good Friday. He says, where is that? What have I done to you, my people? I can't remember that. There's a lot of Marian imagery in it, references to Mary, which of course I like. He says, Lord, I'm not worthy. We say that in the Mass. My people, here we go. It's a chapter, or not chapter, but section 5. He's using the Good Friday, what is it called? The Good Friday admonishments or something like that. I can't remember now. So he weaves in like these prayers, like words from these prayers, these very common prayers. So it sort of gives them an extra meaning. Here, he ends this, and after this, our exile. That comes from a Marian prayer called, Hail Holy Queen. So it's just, it's just very interesting. It's very religious, of course. It's Ash Wednesday. And I wish I understood it more, but even though I don't understand it, there's something very beautiful about it, and I really, really appreciate it. So last month, I read a lot of I keep saying Robert Frost. I said Robert Frost last time. Robert Burns. I read like maybe 20-something of his ballads. But this month, the poet is T.S. Eliot, and I'm just going to read this one poem. I'm just going to focus on it, and like I said, I'm rereading it to try to get more and more out of it. And I should read some sort of analysis about it so that I do get more out of it. Okay, so let's see. What else do I still need to talk about? Oh, I forgot to get it. Oh, and it's my most beautiful book. But I read Arabella by Georgette Hare for Regency, for Feb Regency. And that was a wonderful reread. I have a beautiful edition that I got for Christmas from my husband and from the Folio Society. And I think that is a really good book if you've heard about Georgette Hare and you're interested in Regency romances, because she kind of invented the genre. She wrote back from the 30s through maybe the 70s, something like that. She kind of paralleled Agatha Christie's writing career, or just the timeline. But Arabella, I think, is a good one to start with because it's very sweet and doesn't go over the top the way some of hers. Some of Hare's romances are very swashbuckling, and they have kind of over the top plot twists that sometimes aren't entirely believable. But this one is quieter, and it's full of humor, and the characters are all great. The love story is sweet. And so, yeah, Arabella, that was a reread, and that was for Feb Regency, and I really enjoyed that. And I think I finished that on Valentine's Day. Yeah, I finished reading that. And then, what else have I think that's it for what I finished, except for this is the last one. This is The Tragedy of Miriam. And I was reading this also for Feb Regency on the idea that it influenced the writers of the Feb Regency, but it turns out that this was found in these papers of this, noble family in England, and it wasn't published. It wasn't actually published to anyone other than the family until 1970, I think. So it didn't influence, but it's really interesting. This would have fit in with There's No Place Like Rome. So this is set in Miriam is the second wife of Herod, King Herod. And what happens is, and she took this from Josephus. What happened was Herod had been backing Mark Antony. So when Mark Antony loses the Battle of Actium, and it turns out that he had backed the wrong side, he has to go to Rome to sort of reconcile with Augustus Caesar. And so while he's there in Rome, there's a rumor that he's been killed. And everyone kind of expected that he would be killed. So what happens when you have this really brutal leader who goes away and you hear this rumor that he's been killed? Everybody starts doing what they want to do, that he's been preventing them from doing. So Miriam, his wife, who he's obsessed with, but she does not love him, she feels this sense of freedom. Like she's grieving because, he was her husband. I think she was married to him for a number of years, but she always felt bad about his first wife and those children. And so she feels a sense of relief. And then his brother is in love with somebody, and he wouldn't let him marry her. And his sister, Salome, is now going to be able to divorce her husband and run off with her other lover. And all these machinations are going on. And but then it turns out that he wasn't executed. He worked out a deal with Caesar, and he comes back. And it's like, what happens when he comes back? And it's definitely a tragedy because he comes back. Herod was just crazy, right? And he was so brutal and so paranoid. But he had told a trusted servant, that if he is executed, to kill Miriam, because he doesn't want anyone else having Miriam. And so, but the servant was too fond of Miriam, so he didn't do it. He didn't want to kill her. So then when Herod comes back, he thinks, oh, I'm in big trouble because I didn't kill Miriam when we heard this rumor that we thought was true. But Herod, so what happens, well, I won't go into detail, but Herod is vacillating between killing Miriam or not killing Miriam. And then Miriam takes the choice from him by killing herself. And then he goes off into this really long, could have been edited, soliloquy where he's talking about Miriam on and on. It's very, very little action, and it's just mostly these long soliloquies. But it was really, it was interesting. It was really interesting, and I thought that she wrote very, very well. This is Elizabeth Carey, Lady Falkland. So very interesting, and I would like to read more about it. The second part of the book is a biography written by one of her daughters. So she seemed like a really intelligent, a great writer. It would be interesting to read, but I feel like I don't have time. That's one of the problems I have with BookTube, is that I get involved in all these things and I have all these plans, and then I put pressure on myself to complete all these things. And I don't feel like I have the time to just, it'd be nice to just stop and read this whole thing, but it wasn't on my agenda, so I'm going to put it off till later. All right, so those were all the things that I read so far in February. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, is that just 5? And then, of course, I'm reading things. So I'm still reading things, and I'm hoping to finish them by the end of February. And it's the 19th, right? So 10 more days, 10 days. So I started reading The Warden by Anthony Trollope. This is a reread. I haven't been getting into it as quickly as I thought I would, partly because the print, it's, I just read Notes from the Underground. Where's that? In the same Oxford. See, this is also in Oxford, right? But the print is bigger and darker. Whereas on this one, it's lighter and smaller. And I'm just having trouble reading it. So I thought I would read it before bed, but it's not that comfortable there. So I'd like to sit up and read it. So I have to figure out when I'm going to read this during the day, because I want to be sitting up and reading it instead of right before bed. And then I'm also reading, so let's see, wait a second. The Notes from the Underground, that was a buddy read with Christy Lewis of Dostoevsky in Space, and Peggy from the bookshelf, the history shelf. But we didn't have much of a conversation on Voxer at all. So I don't know, it kind of fizzled as a group read, but maybe we'll talk about it later, maybe at the end of the month. And then The Warden, this is for the Faded Pages book club that Sean Standfast runs. And so that's that. And then for We Love Jenny, now I DNF'd the Villa, but I have been reading The Question of Canon. Been reading this with Christy Lewis as well. And I think I'm only like 28% in, but I think there's lots and lots of footnotes. So I might be further than where I actually am on page 107. So, but this is very interesting. I was really intimidated by it first, but now I'm really enjoying thinking about how the canon, by the question of canon, he means how did the New Testament get written down, and it's very interesting, and it also would work for There's No Place Like Rome, because right here he's referencing Galen. He talks about what was going on in the Roman culture at that time, and when would they write things down, and how would they write things down, and how are the Christians different, and how were they the same, and how they were influenced, and all that stuff. So it's very much it would very much qualify for the There's No Place Like Rome reading of it. But anyway, so I'm just going to keep, chugging away on this. I don't know if I'll have it done by the end of February, but I don't know if I care whether it's done by the end of February. It depends on Christy Lewis and what she has time for. The other, wait a second, the other one that I'm reading on my Kindle, and this is kind of a scream because I did not plan to read this one at all, but it just, I saw it on the Book Gorilla specials, and it just sounded so intriguing. It's a, what do you call it, a dime novel? It's a cowboy tale, but it's set in New Zealand, and it's called it's called, what is his name? Henry Appleton, Boy Hero and the Burgess Gang. So I think it's kind of a hoot. So I also started reading that, but I think that I'm only, I don't even know how far I am in it. I'm only, you know, a chapter in or something. So those are two Kindle reads, one unexpected and one I'm not sure when I want to finish it or when we have to finish it. And then there's The Warden. And then this is the one that I want to just curl up and read, but I'm stretching out because it's the Lenten read along, and it's The Long Loneliness by Dorothy Day. And she was a marvelous writer. Oh my goodness, she could write. And I'm just taking notes. It's so interesting. It's such an interesting glimpse into that time. She's talking about right now about how interviewing Trotsky and how she worked with Max Eastman, and she met Jack Reed or John Reed. Yeah, and she's talking about Emma Goldman and all these people back then. It's just really, really interesting. And she has such a way with words. It's really, really compelling reading. So I want to just read this. I want to just curl up and read this, but I'm stretching it out, like I said, because it's the Lenten read along. And there has been some conversation going on the Discord about this. So that's been interesting. So yeah, so this is my favorite right now. I got to get into The Warden, and then I've got the Question of Canon and the Boy Hero book, and that's what's ongoing right now. I feel like I'm missing something, but I've already talked a lot, so I'm not going to say anything more. Oh, I just wanted to show you one book that I got from the Valentine's Day exchange that Kate Howe has, and I got this really neat book, The Comfort of Crows, a Backyard Year by Margaret Renkel. And I had not heard of her, but I did start to read this a little bit. It's such a lovely, I love these nature books. And then, look, she has these great illustrations. Who's it illustrated by? I think it's by her son or something, does the illustrations. Yeah, Billy Renkel. I don't know if he's her husband or her brother or her son. But anyway, yeah, so I wish I did have time to read this, but I have to prioritize things. So, all right, so that is it for this. I'm sorry that I talked so long. My next video, though, is going to be about my TBR for There's No Place Like Rome. Because, I forgot to say, I'm still listening to SPQR. I think I have about 6 hours left, so I'm going to finish that. And I have a bunch of books that I plan to read. And I'm getting excited about There's No Place Like Rome. So, all right, I'm going to end there because, wow, I talked too long. So I will talk to you later. I hope that you are all doing well and happy reading.